And I'm going to ask Councillor Irving-Swift to speak, propose it.
I hope you all have read the report. I do not propose to read it again to you, and I will go straight to the question that I cannot answer. Matt will answer later to you. Also, Matt asked me to, if you have any concern, he will remind to every member of the chamber that is always available. He will reply to email, he will give appointment. So please do not feel that is the only occasion that you can raise questions. Matt will always have his door open. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we've got to... Sorry, I didn't see...
I thought you were going to not invite questions on the leaders' report.
No, I was just about to.
Oh.
But you were just before me, that's all. I was anxious to get the meeting started quick, and I didn't see the written down questions for a start. Where are they? That one, isn't it? No, that's the amendment. I haven't got the right... I'll grab yours, Jenny. Thank you. Right, so the first one is a question from Councillor Brookfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Councillor Golby isn't here to answer a follow-up, then I can always write to him in the future, as Councillor Irving-Swift offered. But it was just to point out to draw the attention of the council to how this council disposes of its former school properties. And my question was, whilst it related to the primary schools in the north of the county, that... I beg your pardon, I'm so sorry, I just thought...
No, that's all right, we all forget it sometimes.
I know, I thought because... Forgive me. Because it was... I think it is something for the council to consider going forward as well, about how it disposes of any more buildings or assets in its possession. And there has been a lot of uncertainty in Oundle about what has happened to the former primary school building, which is near the town centre, because that has been empty for some time. And the local community were not aware, but also as councillors who have been concerned about education, we really want to know when the education in that area was reorganised, and Councillor Brackenbury will remember this well, I'm sure, as though it were yesterday. It was a large reorganisation, and I think we're still feeling the ramifications of that, and we still have buildings that are unused and should have been disposed of, and at least you know, we should have realised those assets. But I will ask Councillor Golby a more detailed question about the values, and I'm sure we can have a confidential chat about any commercial implications of the sale of the school site.
Thank you. Right, the next one is from Councillor Hakewell.
Turn his microphone on.
Oh, right. Right, it's okay. It didn't answer the question at all. Well, I heard that bit.
Sorry. Yes, Chairman. The answer, the process I was saying was that we could stop unitary now, you'll see that,
yeah,
because we were told to have a fresh approach, and we keep being told we've got a fresh approach and we've got enough money to do everything we want. So that would seem easy to save 44 million. In the answer, it talks about the commissioners and the letter and so on. It doesn't answer the question. If we've got a fresh start, why are we continuing with unitary? the answer just doesn't do it, does it?
Okay, so you're going to pursue that with Councillor Golby?
Through you, no, I got better things to do. Thank you.
I won't say a word. Right, the third one is to Councillor Morris, and it's again from Councillor Hakewell. Any supplementary to that, Councillor Hakewell?
Thank you on that one.
No, okay. The next one's to Councillor Morris, and that's from your good self as well.
Yeah, in number 4, Councillor Morris, you talk in the 4th line from the bottom, access funding, Isham Bypass is one of 2 schemes that, with the support of district and borough council leaders. On the top of question 3, you said conversations took place with NCC, KBC, with blah, 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 but could not be reached. So on the one hand, in question 3, you couldn't reach any consensus with the leaders, and in question 4, the runes read badly, don't they? Because why would you get any better improvement in 4 now, when the boroughs of Wellingborough and Kettering didn't agree last time?
Thank you. Do you want to answer, Councillor Morris?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure what the question really was there, but I'll try and sum up what I think the question was relating to those 2 points that he's raised. Obviously, the Isham Bypass remains a high priority for both the county and the district councils involved. There is always going to be an issue about funding with all of these projects because, quite simply, we don't have enough funding to be able to deliver these projects without some gap funding, as it were, from other sources. So I think, although we did say in the first question that there had been discussions with the borough and districts that hadn't bore fruit in terms of finance, that doesn't mean that we don't still prioritise those roads and those schemes, and we will continue to do that, and we will always try and find funding for those where we can. I hope that the Isham Bypass in particular will be a #1 priority for the new Northamptonshire unitary, and it's still in our priority list, so we will be working towards delivering that, well, not delivering it because it won't be delivered in time before we go unitary, but working with our colleagues and borough colleagues and district colleagues to try and get that as far along the road as we can prior to its delivery, which will probably be around 2022. But there is no current funding for the Isham Bypass as we stand, but we are always looking for new ways to fund such innovative projects. So we'll keep the dialogue open and the priority will remain. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Question to Malcolm Longley again from your good self. Do you have a supplementary on that one? No?
Don't worry overly, there's no subsidiary on that one and there's no subsequent question on number 6. I thank both portfolio holders for their answers.
I beg your pardon. Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions, please?
Councillor Stone.
Councillor Stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions on the leaders' report. Is that okay? Okay. I feel really concerned about item 13, where it says children's services remain an area of concern. I've been a county councillor for nearly 6 years, and all the time I've been a county councillor, children's services have been a concern. And I'm really worried that we are becoming acclimatised to that fact, and we're not taking it as urgently as we should. And I just wanted the Chamber to know that I've just recently been on a refresher, a safeguarding course, because I'm the safeguarding lead for a number of organisations. And at the end of the training, we were told as a group of 25 people, it would be best not to report safeguarding issues to the county, but it would be safer to report it to this voluntary organisation or NSPCC, because they will act on it quicker and better and more effectively. And I was ashamed to be a county councillor in that room at that time. And it's worried me. You know, if people can't have confidence that if they phone the MASH they're going to be properly listened to and action is going to follow, then that is a very serious matter. And it also raised for me the question that was raised by previous directors of children's, which is what happens to the referrals that are deemed not to be safeguarding issues? Because even if they don't meet what seems to be our very exceptionally high threshold for it becoming a safeguarding issue, there still will be issues. So what is happening there? So I am really quite alarmed by that, I have to say. And then in a way, and associated with that, we've got a report here from the chair of the Improvement Board, and I'd like to thank that person, whoever it is, this kind of amorphous, anonymous body. But my question there is, what difference is that board making? Because I tell you something, I am really tired of the money and the time being allocated to bureaucracy instead of frontline services. So I would like to know what difference it's made, what difference it's making, and how much it's costing.
Thank you. Do you want to answer that, or do you want to? I can't hear you.
I will answer one by one because my brain might not cope. First, Councillor Stone, if you are ashamed to be a county councillor, it's time for you not to be ashamed. It's time for you to be a corporate parent and do the right thing. Because you just say you were ashamed to be a county councillor. That is your word. You can look, you can listen. Now, our leader said that he's working very closely with Councillor Baker. Our services are fragile in children and we take it very seriously. We are going to do everything we can to be robust. Now, we are all corporate parents. If you have an issue of safeguarding, you have to let Councillor Baker and Sally Hodge, our director of things. We cannot let other organizations do, because it's also put us in more danger. So by not telling us what happened, we cannot do if we don't know. So please, I feel your remark very odd, and also we are very transparent. When you say we are not, we are doing meeting after meeting, we are not improving, we are trying to make things transparent. We are trying to make our report smaller. We are trying, example, this morning about public health, we went for 28 recommendations to 8. We are trying to do, we have one scrutiny board, we are trying to do the best we can. And if you have any question about the safeguarding of children, it is have offline with Councillor Baker, or I will ask Councillor Baker if she would like to add something. Thank you.
Sorry. We struggle sometimes because of deafness. I do apologise. Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We are working exceedingly hard in the children's team. We all know it's not a surprise that our children's service has been having problems. It's not a surprise to any of us. But we are actually working day by day to make improvements wherever we can. We have a very active and strong workload, which we are all working on very hard. I don't think anybody that's been here can have worked as hard as I have done in the last month on making changes to our children's service. I'm very happy to meet with you at some time and go through all the different things that we are doing. I don't have them all in the top of my head now, but there are many, many changes, and I'm sure our new director would be happy to join us and reassure you that we are doing everything that we can at the moment. These things take time to change, and you know that we need to have more staff. We are looking for more social workers every day of the week. And if anybody sees our social worker application form on their Facebook page or social media, please share it around county, because we need more good quality, not recently qualified, good quality social workers. But please don't feel you need to refer, as Councillor Evans-Swift said, children to other agencies, because this is the best place for them to be referred, and they are being looked at straight away. I don't know the system for what happens after we've decided they're not ones that we need to be concerned about, but I will look into that and come back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to comment on what's just been said by Councillor Baker. I've had a number of occasions, not involving constituents, but involving companies, where they've had issues and they've got onto the MASH. They have not been satisfactorily dealt with at all. They've been turned away. And in 2 occasions I can think of, it was the police every time that stepped in and solved the issues in the short term. The MASH has not been very good at solving things in the short term, and that was one of the Ofsted issues. So I'm hoping the work that's being done is trying to rectify that. The other point I was going to make is on item 14, and speak about the early years funding, because I think we've all seen what's been in the papers recently about the 1.8 million pounds that we're looking to save from early years, and the 300k clawback from the 9 nurseries in the county. It's the 9 nurseries in the county that I'm particularly concerned about, and one in my constituency that I'm concerned about, and that's Pen Green, because in that instance, out of the £300,000 clawback, and again that's an issue of interpretation, which the department and this authority seem to disagree on or to interpret in different ways until recent times. But the Pen Green part of that apparently is £98,000. And when you add in things like the government changes in their criteria, where you can no longer count 50p per child per hour into the formula, that means that places, Pen Green in particular, is going to lose £250,000. Now, that's been classed as the most outstanding facility in the country recently. And yet it's one we're going to take money away, and that will cause redundancies, that will cause a deterioration in the sort of services they'll be able to provide. And it's quality we'll look at. We had the debate earlier on about education. When you look at the figures, I get totally frustrated. We've got the early years sector where, by and large, they're good or outstanding, 90% of them. You look at the schools, it drops right down. You look at the colleges, it's rock bottom. You know, that's what we've got in the county. That's what we've got to be fighting against. It's our children that are going to inherit that. It's our children's jobs that are at stake in all of this. And it's an area we need to address, and we need to address radically. Yeah, I know we have no power in a lot of areas, but together we can make a noise and we can do something. And I'd urge we start that sort of campaign. Thank you.
Yes, I have to say, I listened to what Councillor Stone had to say about item 13 on this report, and I have to say I was surprised to hear that of all the people who's a conscientious corporate parent, Councillor Stone is pretty high up the list. So I would, to suggest she isn't is, I think, not correct. What I'd like to know is, in 2 years, do we have more social workers or less social workers? Do we have more people waiting for being helped at the MASH or less? And if we've actually got less, then we're going totally in the wrong direction and something else needs to be done about it.
Well, I will answer Councillor Bob Scott and Councillor Deleyu. I think for the numbers, Councillor Golby will answer directly to Councillor and will send a note to all councillors. And as far as the issue about the preschool, Councillor Baker sent a note, recapitulation of all what has been done. And it's an ongoing issue, and we hope that we will solve it in the best ways possible. The new director of Children's Services has been very proactive, and I'm sure everybody will understand better with a note that Councillor Baker has sent to everybody. I think it should have helped you to see the problem and how we plan to solve it. And so, and offline, if you would like to have a meeting with Councillor Baker and Councillor Golby, you would be more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. Also on question or point 13 of the leader's report, we're told by the leader we still have to make significant progress at the front door in the MASH. When the Children's Commissioner joined this council some time ago, Scrutiny Chair and Vice Chairs asked to meet with him, and he was very kind to meet with us, and he told us that, I think he said it was his #1 priority to make improvements in the MASH. So I'm concerned to read that we still have to make significant progress at the front door in the MASH. Can we have an assurance that some significant progress will be made very soon, please?
To ask Councillor Baker to answer that point, please.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough, we want to make significant progress because we want our MASH to be perfect. We have made significant progress already over how it was before. We have already got our unallocated numbers down significantly, and it is something that we are working on very hard. But we want it to be perfect. We want every inquiry that comes in to be dealt with straight away. That's when it will be right. All the time we've got 5 waiting, it still is a work in progress.
Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure we all recognise that the mess at Children's Services and indeed the transformation for young people to adults is in. But recently, and I need help and support for this, recently I went to support a young lady who had a young gentleman staying with her who the social worker had went on a sick. So eventually got a manager in to speak to her, and the manager said, I'll put a student social worker in there as soon as I leave. And this young lady now is being threatened with eviction 4 weeks later. It begs the question what kind of support she is getting. And hopefully, when I send the case to the relevant cabinet member, they will follow that up and make sure that this young lady does not get evicted.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. Anybody wish to say anything on that point?
Well, it's nothing to add. It's a personal statement
Comment,
of one person, and I think that is appropriately taken offline with the children, our new children director.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I'm asking Council to note the report and answers. Okay. We move on to scrutiny business. So, I'm going to invite Mrs. Jean Lineker to address the Council. That's all right, you've been very patient, you've been here all day, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
But I do thank you for letting me speak. I want to thank a lot of the councillors in here today, that's Liberal, Labour, Conservative, for letting me attend scrutiny on children. Now, it needs to be more scrutinised and more done. Believe you me, there's more in social services in children and I think we need more money forthcoming. Social services are strapped for cash. I know that. But there are means that they can continue with, instead of having these mics, when they go and visit children, please be careful when you visit children that have been abused. Children that have been abused are being abused. Sorry, I'll start again. Do forgive me, Chair. Children who are abused react. And they react in funny ways. Epilepsy. My sister had them. She was abused. I played up when I was young. I played my mother up, something chronic. I remember. And my mum landed up in Bexley Heath Hospital with a nervous breakdown. We landed up all in homes. You have heard my story before about me being in the home. They've both been investigated. Councillor Goby knows that full well. And I have spoken to Councillor Goby when he was children. And I did mention things were going to go wrong. And they have. You've had children die of abuse.
1 minute.
I know, but I want to introduce you something that you might be... I'm sorry, Chair, I'm going to be slightly longer, if you don't mind. This is serious. When you are abused, and I want the children's new cabinet holder to realise that there are some other agencies you can contact. And older care too. Please, councillors, adhere to the Carers Society, who have helped me with dementia, with children. They are social workers going there instead of working here because they are overstretched. They're undermanned. All right? Those are the particular things I want to stress. And I want to stress that when you are abused, people have got to take notice now. I am 70 years old, and I've been trying to stress this for years. There are two charity organisations. One is the Carers Society, and the other one's the Rape Crisis Centre. And without those, I wouldn't have been able to cope. So I'm saying, and I'm hoping, that you councillors will listen to me and do something for children within Northampton society.
Thank you. Thank you,
I'm
Mrs.
sorry I
Rennigan.
took longer, Chair, but thank you.
We always appreciate you coming along and speak. Thank you. I'm going to invite Councillor Scrimshaw now to propose the report.
Thank you, Chair. As I've said in the written report, the new scrutiny committee is continuing to refine its approach. But so far, I think the committee has already proved its value. The scrutiny of the 1920 budget seems to have been regarded as useful, and I hope also seen as constructive. We were somewhat restricted by previous practices and time limits as what we could actually do, and it's probably true we didn't have the time to completely reinvent the process in the way we would have liked. But I hope the style and tone of our meetings were positive. We will be looking at how this process should continue in the future, although this is complicated by the move to unitary, as next year's budget will presumably be put forward by the shadow authorities, and we'll have to sort of find a way to input into that process. But I think we've already learned some lessons that will help. It also mentions in the report that we're currently looking at how best to monitor the in-year progress of the Council's budget for this year, and this will perhaps form the most important part of our work over the next year. The committee is not there to hold the administration to account, which is a job for backbench councillors to do in meetings such as this, like the full council. It's there to add value to the decision-making process of the council, and I think so far we're succeeding to do that. That's being done by a genuine commitment from all the committee to work constructively, and I'd like to highlight the genuine cross-party approach that the committee are taking. This has been helped by the Council's decision to have a team of vice-chairs from all political groups. And I've already spoken to the Centre for Public Scrutiny of my belief that this model is paying dividends, and I hope this idea can be used perhaps by other councils around the country. To that end, I would like to publicly thank not only my vice-chairs, but every committee member for their efforts to put aside any political differences. We have to ensure that the work we're doing is constructive and efficient. We all have different ideas of what the council should be doing, but we recognise the leadership were democratically elected, so even for those of us that wish the council were doing different things, scrutiny has shown that it's able to put those differences to one side and try to inform and help Cabinet in improving the process of bringing forward their own agenda. Whatever the council does, it needs to do it in a way that best benefits our local residents, and an efficient scrutiny function can only help that. As a scrutiny committee, we're still finding our way and looking to improve the way we work with that aim in mind. And to that end, I would call on other councillors, including those in the Cabinet, to not only support scrutiny and give it the space that it needs to operate, but also to listen very carefully to any comments and recommendations we put forward. Our deliberations and subsequent comments are not decided on lightly. We aim to offer genuine help to the Council, and while we are still exploring ways to do that, it's also important for the Council as a whole to find new ways to interact with scrutiny. For example, scrutiny reported to the last Cabinet on the work it had done on the budget proposals for learning disability. This work stemmed from our initial budget review, where we realised we needed more information and further deliberation. At Cabinet, our report was welcomed, but it was said that our concerns had been answered. That wasn't entirely true. In the report we sent to Cabinet, while supporting the direction the Council were moving in, we did highlight some risks to the proposals that we thought it important Cabinet consider. So I was a little disappointed at the lack of debate in Cabinet about those comments, and while I look forward to reading Cabinet's formal response that will be given to our meeting at the end of this month, for scrutiny to work, it cannot simply be a case that we bounce written reports backwards and forwards between the two committees. Cabinet members need to be discussing our findings so they fully understand any concerns that we put forward. And whilst I accept that that may be happening in private, we all need to make sure that scrutiny function works and helps inform the leadership's decision-making process, and isn't just some sort of tick-box exercise where we can say scrutiny has been done, but without it making any real difference. I'd also like to particularly refer to the piece of work that Scrutiny did on the 6th of March, which is also in the report. This was about the issue of early years payments to nursery providers, and it came about by following public concerns and press reports highlighting the problem, a problem perhaps that some backbench councillors outside the Cabinet weren't at that time too familiar with. The committee therefore decided to respond to those concerns by doing a look at the issue. This was, sorry, you had enough?
Yeah, 5 minutes, yeah.
No problem.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Eakins.
Yes, Chair. I'd like to continue on with what Councillor Scrimshaw was saying on how this scrutiny now is working and functioning very well, and it's cross-party, as he already said, and I can compel all the same sentiments that he said previously. It is ongoing work. It's working very well, as we said. It needs to continue in the same format that it started in. The good thing about this is it is cross-party, and the political, shall we say, elements are actually kept to a very minimum. But the more important thing is that we are digging down to the nitty-gritty of certain things, and I will say there is no subject that is taboo. If there's an issue to be raised, then it is raised without any fear of any reprisals in any matter to any person or anybody. It is what it says. It's scrutiny and overview. And all I can add to that is, as Councillor Scrimshaw has already said, is that we continue in the same trend. It is, so shall we say, autonomous to any other committees in the council, and so it should be. And like I was saying, it should continue without any kind of interference from anybody else, whether it be commissioners or cabinet.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Walker. Right. Councillor Scrimshaw.
No. No, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Stamborough. I do beg your pardon.
Thank you very much, Chair.
I'll get your two names mixed up.
So, talking firstly about the piece of scrutiny work that we did on the 6th of March around the county's payments to early years providers, absolutely echo what the Chair of Scrutiny said. I thought, and I might say this, would I say this, wouldn't I? I thought that was a good piece of work. I wasn't able to be there for when the resolutions were put together, and I would say that one thing that would also help the early years providers a lot would be that when they get a payment, they get remittance advice they can actually relate to the claim they put in the first place. It will save them all some hours of work in reconciling the two, and I would hope that that's maybe something that can be noted and acted upon. There's no doubt that officers are working hard to turn the position round with regards to early years providers, and we're grateful for that. But it's clearly work in progress. There's still lots of trust to win back. And I can't help thinking that there's a huge danger that any trust that has been won back already and any trust that might have been won back is going to be endangered by the way that the setting of rates for early years providers has been handled to date. I note that there was a debate at the Schools Forum and that there maybe are going to be some rethinks. I would hope that that's the case because clearly providers are very, very concerned at the moment on that issue. Turning to the Chair of Scrutiny's report, I wonder if he would agree with me that looking at almost the last line of the report where the Chair says that Overview and Scrutiny has an important job in ensuring what time the Council does have left is used in the best possible way. Absolutely agree with that. In return, I think it's important that if Scrutiny is to play its full part in that, Scrutiny must be allowed to have the information it feels it needs when it asks for it so that we can play our full part in that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, Chair. You know, you normally do a great job, sir, and I appreciate your chairmanship, but I think on cutting Councillor Scrimshaw a little bit short on not allowing him to finish his narrative, I was actually quite interested in what he was saying. This is really important work to support and help our Cabinet and the delivery of our services. I know you are very wise on many of these occasions, but I would ask maybe in future we could have the Chair finish his narrative, even if you need to give him a little bit more time, because it's well informed and it also changes our culture into understanding the importance of scrutiny, the importance of listening to scrutiny, because at the end of the day, these are the checks and balances that we need to improve the services to our residents. So it was just an observation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Auger. I'd like to answer that. In the real world, I'd like to give everybody the opportunity to finish their speeches, but then I get the argument the other side that I'm not keeping to the 3 minutes, the 5 minutes. So it's a balancing act. I apologise if you took offence. I'm sure you didn't, because you're a big, strong lad. I understand what you mean, Councillor Auger. Councillor Irving-Swift.
Yes, it's also, you say that scrutiny has to be done very independently, but it's important to note the Commissioner have written a letter to the Secretary of State to state the progress we have made, and in their letter, they say that now scrutiny work very well. So I think it's important to say that you have done a super job, and the Cabinet is listening, and also the new administration. So I think scrutiny is working very, very, very well. Also, it is important to note that we have in place a program for all councillors to learn more about scrutiny, and that helps us to make better decisions. So our democratic services are sending information about when the sessions are, on how to be better at scrutiny, and I will invite all councillors to go to those sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Chair. What I want to, it's really a question for Councillor Grimshaw. Sorry, my thing's gone. I'll
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Scott. If you get your thoughts together, Councillor Meredith, you can come back again, okay? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Scrutiny Committee. I think they've done a very good job this year. With the new system they've got, I think it's gelled very well. And as the opposition leader, I've been very pleased with the way they've performed and the subject matter they've covered, especially arguing for extra sessions where areas they felt were of concern, which the commissioners originally didn't. So I thank them very much for that. And I would like to pass on comments that were made at the Improvement Board, where the commissioners were very complimentary of the scrutiny process, and as has been outlined, has been put in the letter to the Minister, and the board did express their satisfaction, complete satisfaction, and congratulations to the Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naden Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also thank Scrutiny for their work that they've done in adult social care. It's been very robust, and I've really appreciated any feedback that I've been given, so thank you. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Lineker for her patience today and coming to speak to us in support of Scrutiny, which is very welcomed. As an individual myself who has personally experienced abuse, and throughout my career I've supported both adults and children who have experienced abuse, and in my work now with Anxiety UK, I help people every week. I fully support the work that the Carer Society and the Rape Crisis Centre does, and if there's anything I can do to support the organisation, I would be more than pleased to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a short question. Addressed to the Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It seems very likely that we're going to end up with our children's services being injected into a children's trust. When that happens, there will be significant complications of, for instance, payments to early years providers, because that will be done by the County Council for a while, then by the unitaries. My question is this: will the Overview and Scrutiny Committee be looking into the potential complications produced by going to a children's trust, particularly with the prospect of the county then being split into two?
Thank you. Do you wish to speak again, Councillor? Okay, Councillor Meredith, thank you. Councillor McGee.
I've got a quick question. He's keen. He's a keen chair, isn't he? A very quick question. You know, for years and years we do scrutiny, we look at things in depth and then we make recommendations. As the Chair of Scrutiny said, it goes to the Cabinet. But what we've never really did, or never attempted to do properly, is follow that up every 2, 3, 4 months and get that feedback of their recommendations. Are they working? If not, will you look at it again? And are they successful or not? And we need some sort of system where that can happen, or all we're doing is just having a talking shop. So we really need to get that nailed down so we can help improve the services we have.
Thank you. Councillor Adam Brown.
Yeah, just to follow up Councillor McGee's comments, I think it's a fantastic suggestion. I believe it would be easily implemented. We have a very similar scheme in place at Daventry District Council, where I chair scrutiny. Once recommendations are from scrutiny are approved by full council, with a 1-year post-implementation activity review goes to scrutiny 12 months down the line for scrutiny to be able to review the effectiveness of its recommendations and the way that they've impacted upon policy. Maybe a 12-month time frame is irrelevant in our situation, but actually I think the institutional knowledge that we all gain as councillors, for any of us that do go through to the new unitaries, the knowledge that we gain now will be invaluable in helping those new institutions to actually implement really effective, really valuable scrutiny, so that those institutions can thrive and serve the people to the best of all of our abilities.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And it's back to you, Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank, in particular, the Deputy Leader for saying scrutiny was working well, which was also echoed by Councillor Scott, commenting on the Commissioner's very complimentary comments. And it was also good to hear, obviously, from Cabinet Member that they are taking seriously and listening to anything that we see. I think my overall point about that would probably be just that we need to be careful that we don't almost lull ourselves into false security. It's great that scrutiny is seen at the moment to be doing well, but don't forget it needs to continue to do well, and that will only work with the involvement of all council and in particular the Cabinet. To some specific questions, Councillor Mercer, question about Children's Trust, and probably the more fundamental question about how the shadow authorities will deal with scrutiny. Very important, and I hope that this Council's Scrutiny Committee can work closely with whatever shadow arrangements are put in place, because you're absolutely right. What happens over the next year will inform what happens further down the line. That's really important. I think Councillor Brown was also sort of mentioning that, and Councillor McGee also talking about the point about future monitoring. That's something that's already occupying the thoughts of Scrutiny Committee, and we're hopefully going to find ways to make sure that that happens. And Councillor Stamborough, do I agree that information should be available to scrutiny? Well, yeah, of course I do. And it's actually something that I have spoken specifically to the Centre for Public Scrutiny about, just to get their views, and they agree with me that information that scrutiny wants should be available, and I'm hoping that committee members will become empowered themselves to be able to ask for whatever information that they feel that they need, and that the council will be able to provide that information, because they're not necessarily just answering one particular member. That member will share the information back with the Scrutiny Committee, and that helps us inform any future deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Council, please note the report and the given questions and the given answers. We move on now to motions. The one by Councillor Chown. Over to you, Councillor.
You forgot my name again, didn't you?
I did for a second. I was going to call you Councillor Pinder again, but that's old hat now, so Councillor Chowan.
Before presenting this motion, I'd like to thank Councillors Scott and Stamborough for their recommended amendments. I've considered and accepted these amendments. In addition to this, I've also added some additional text as well. But before I read this motion, I would like to recognise some of the work, some of the organisations within my division. So I'd like to recognise the work that Upton Meadows Residents Association have done to raise this issue. Marina Park Residents Association, which also falls within my parish council ward. And I also would like to mention residents living in Pineham Lock, Pineham Estates, Upton Parish Council and Hunsbury Meadows Parish Council as well. So I'd like to move to the motion now and read that out. So this council recognises the importance of making our community a better place to live for everyone. While government policy requires the need for more housing and new homes to be built, it is also important to understand that Northamptonshire residents should receive value for money services. Quite often, residents are penalised and paying a second tax in newly built areas through developers establishing and allocating managed agencies to new developments. It is important to recognise the issue of managed agencies allocated by developers at a national level and the need for them to be regulated. Northampton Borough Council, NBC, have passed a motion expressing residents' views and concerns and are actively looking at ways to regulate managed agencies locally. including encouraging developers to consider all alternatives available. This issue affects all 7 districts and boroughs across Northamptonshire. Northamptonshire County Council, as the local authority responsible for adoptions, therefore resolves to make it clear that there are significant concerns regarding the establishment of managed agencies. Furthermore, this council urges that our MPs raise this matter with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government to work towards regulating managed agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a seconder? Councillor Ty.
Thank you, Chairman. This issue regarding developer-managed agencies goes back many years. Pardon? Yes. Thank you. I'm glad you agree. In fact, in 2009, Cabinet requested a scrutiny review of road adoptions, which resulted in 14 recommendations. One of these was to make representations to the Local Government Association, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Transport, urging that it is a mandatory requirement for developers to enter into Section 38 agreement with highways authorities prior to commencement of work on site. This enables the Highways Authority to reach a legal agreement with the owner and developer of a site that a road will become a highways maintained at public expense. There was another scrutiny review after that, chaired by, I think it was the Lib Dems. I remember that Bob Scott was a member of that committee at the time. Of course, considerable house building followed, with some issues about adoptions unresolved after all that time. One of which is the basis of today's motion. The Kettering MP Philip Hollowbone raised the issue surrounding unadopted roads 10 times between 2009 and 2011 with the appropriate minister. The last time was in 2017 with the then Roads Minister Andrew Jones. However, HS2 and Heathrow expansion took precedent. We still have a number of roads in the county that have not been adopted or are of an unacceptable standard if they were adopted. In 2017, my EDT Scrutiny Committee, because so little progress had been made in the intervening years, decided we would progress this outstanding matter through a scrutiny working group. We held 5 scrutiny meetings and gathered data from various speakers, including our own officers, where we examined different routes to adopting roads. We also received guidance about development management, which is really about how we respond to planning applications.
1 minute.
Development is divisive and highly emotional. We held meetings with 2 large developers, Taylor Wimpey and Persimmon Homes. The latter focused on their company's approach based on managed roads rather than bringing roads up for adoption. This was based on the fact that many of Persimmon Home sites included public open spaces that were maintained by management company or resident management company. Annual charges were placed on residents who were made aware of this at the purchase stage. The County Council have no legal powers to force a developer to have a new road adopted or force them into an adoption agreement, Section 38. They can, however, offer it to NCC to be adopted, but it has to be of an adoptable standard. We were told by Persimmon that the barriers to adoption were really to do with high supervision costs, high estimated costs, and high commutable costs, which made it less of an incentive.
Can you finish, please?
To use a management company. An example was given where our partners, Pierce, Kier WSP, at one site quoted estimated costs of £600,000 and actual cost was £350,000. So they went down the management route.
Can you finish now, please?
Yeah. I'm just about to say, Chairman, just to finish, we had one more meeting to make to get advice from districts and boroughs, because 3 of the scrutiny committees were closed down, so to speak. We did not finish that particular scrutiny work programme. And so it is unfinished business. So, in fact, this is why I'm quite keen to support Pinder's...
I'm afraid you'll have to stop now, Councillor Ty.
We should proceed farther with this, but I don't have much hope with the fact that Brexit and military are coming on board.
There's an example of being flexible. I thought I'd mention it. All right, Councillor Birch to speak.
Thank you, Chair.
Hold on. Right, Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to be able to support this motion. It's been one that we've supported across at the borough, and I think the campaigns that have been going on locally with the Dustin Labour Party, who have run a very vigorous campaign against the Timkin tax imposed on the residents of the Timkin estate. It's something that crosses all political groups and affects all our communities. The new houses that are going up all over the country, and families are being caught in the trap of ever-escalating service charges. They're paying twice the services provided by the council and also for to the management companies. There's no accountability to these companies for the standard or the frequency of the work and the escalation of the costs. The future management of green spaces and parking areas in the new developments should be established at the planning stage. And the lack of regulation of these managed agencies has been a scandal for far too long. It's time the government stepped in to stop the shameful practice. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order is?
The point of order is that normally, after a motion is proposed and seconded, if there's any amendments, they are then dealt with before there's discussion on what becomes, the motion.
The amendments were accepted.
Oh, yeah.
By both groups.
Yeah, I was going to say I was withdrawing my amendment.
Yeah.
And thanks, Pinder, for accepting the principles behind that.
Yeah.
But I understood Councillor Stanborough was putting his...
No, I think he accepted as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
There is no point of order then, Chair.
Okay. Right, Councillor Bird should finish. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. This situation has been developing for quite some time, and it's not restricted to Northampton Borough, I can assure you. We've got the same problem right across the county. What's happening is we're seeing smaller and smaller plots with less and less garden space. As a result, you end up with some public open space, a lap or a leap being provided, people saying, oh, well, that's okay, they can go and the kids can go and play there. So effectively, public open space is being substituted for garden space. That's what we're actually seeing. Now, the public open space is not being, in many cases, transferred to a public body, to a town council or a parish council or even a borough. It is instead being kept in one of these management companies. And the householders around there are being told they've got to pay an annual fee to support this public open space, when they're already paying their council tax for public open spaces. As you said, it's effectively double taxation. In Scotland, over many, many years, a system developed where I believe something like 70% of houses in Scotland that were not rented were leasehold. Eventually, the Scottish Parliament changed the law to try and reduce this overhang of leasehold properties. In effect, we are generating a similar version in this country because these houses are not true freehold, they come with a second charge on them, like the ground rent on a leasehold property. We need the central government to change the regulations so that there is the same ability for householders facing this situation to escape from it as there is in Scotland to escape from leasehold. We cannot expect people to pay taxation twice and not eventually to complain.
Thank you. Councillor Dudley Hughes.
Thank you. Briefly, there are three ways in which developers are kind of conning people. First of all, they're building 5 houses on one road, because that's what they're allowed to do. So that means that it's like a managed road. The managed services, and as Councillor Mercer said, many people find when they come to sign along the dotted line, their house is leasehold, and the lease starts off, of course, at £25 a year, or something like that. But you read the small print, because someone's been at me about this. After 5 years, it can be increased, and guess what? It goes from £25 a year to £500 a year. not 50, but 500. So I agree entirely that if we're going to talk to our MPs about this and they're going to say something about it, please can we have less leaseholds, certainly very restricted ones, no these 5 houses on one road, because as you rightly say, to cram them in, and not the managed companies which can charge what they like. Because of course you get in and they say, oh, it's only going to be £100 a year or something, and 5 years later it's £500 a year, which is a big burden on people, especially when the council tax goes up 5% and all the rest.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. And I was losing the will to live with all the amendments. I'm glad that Councillor Chowan has accepted them all, because the first thing I was going to say is NBC, there are the other 6 authorities. Perhaps I shouldn't comment on Councillor Tighe's point that Philip Hollowbone has tried 10 times as to the effectiveness of MPs, so I won't. The other issue that Councillor Mercer brought up and others have is this leasehold issue. In our own family, our son bought a house, albeit not in this county, but then had to pay a significant amount of money to get out of the leasehold part of that. Nothing was as it seemed in terms of how much the house originally cost, and that leasehold would have held on. As I understand it, that's very attractive to pensions companies who buy into these estates and then can get a constant drip of leasehold revenue, or at least the opportunity to hold on to that. But let's also not forget that in the old days, and I'm old enough to have been in the old days, these areas would have been adopted by the local authority almost without question with a Section 238 or Section 78, whichever one it was. The austerity, and in the case of Kettering Borough, by keeping everything at 0, the desire to adopt and to maintain has meant that there are estates which I was on planning for 30 years ago who have been adopted by the local authority, the grass gets cut by them, and then when there's an additional estate built onto that, the people are in exactly what the councillor has said. So we have to be very careful that the constrictions on central government funding have led local authorities, all of the 7 in this county, to not wish particularly to adopt. And there's a classic case in Morsley, which is a completely new village, as those people who will know, 25 years ago, didn't exist at all. Basically, there we've got David Wilson Homes and a number of other developers, and it's almost impossible for a resident who lives in Morsley to know who to ring when the grass gets a foot long. Is it David Wilson? Is it the borough? Is it Taylor Wimpey? So it does leave people into a very difficult situation. But we do have to remember that it's brought about by the austerity within the local authority when it would have just been adopted in the past and is not done so now. So I do support this motion. I support the comments Councillor Mercer and Tighe on leasehold. I think that's wrong too, and Councillor Hughes. But let's forget that in the old days they would have been adopted, it would have come through the council tax, but setting 0 council taxes and looking for every which way to reduce cost has caused this problem to be achieved.
Thank you. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, just 3 points. First of all, Councillor Chan's motion is very timely. This has already been risen at the government level. It's already been talked about in other areas of our country, and I think the timing of it is absolutely perfect, and that lobbying and that pressure needs to maintain. So go to my second point, is this can't be the end game, this motion. You know, this may take some lobbying, some organisation to keep pressure on government to making sure that we deal with this issue, and maybe it will require, and it probably will require, some sort of legislation to ensure our residents are getting treated fairly. So I would hope that not only whilst we are still alive as NCC, but as we go into our separate unitaries, those of us that follow into the new councils, that we continue to monitor this and to continue to lobby the government until action is taken. And finally, I do sense some love in the world. You know, this is the third item I think we've had where there's been some good collaboration. And I'm wondering whether we should all just have a big group hug, Chair, to finish off the meeting. Thank you.
You're going too far now, Councillor Auger. Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I support this motion without the group hug. It seems to me that this is just another example of pushing extra costs onto residents, but of course it's just pushing extra costs onto some residents, so that makes the whole thing unfair. The division I represent, most of the housing is over 100 years old, so this doesn't seem really relevant to me. But I have one road, Poppy Fields in Kettering, near the General Hospital, which is an unadopted road. It doesn't have a managed agency, but you know, when this motion talks about those instances, you know, to consider all other alternatives, I would hope that we can have a dialogue with the MPs about some of those other roads that don't have anything at the moment. That particular one, it's never been up to standard, and of course 10 years on, 15 years on, it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. There are over 1,000 unadopted roads in the county, I believe, and you know, having private management agencies is not the answer. Leaving them unadopted is not the answer. This motion is a good first step, and I say hopefully, as others have said, maybe it will lead on to other things, but certainly we do need to be talking to our local MPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. Before I speak on the substantive motion, I'd like to thank Councillor Chan for accepting my amendment, but also raise a point of order, because in addition to accepting the amendment, she has introduced some alterations to the motion, and I believe that there's a provision that those alterations this meeting should be asked to signify its acceptance of those alterations without debate, and I don't believe we've been asked to do that. Is that the case?
We're just checking. Right, we're going to continue with the debate. Have you finished, Councillor Stamborough?
Yes. Sorry, Chair, what did you say?
Have you finished? Have you finished?
No, I haven't even started yet.
Well, you haven't got much longer.
Okay. Right, so this motion, as altered, without us signifying our acceptance of the alteration, comes under the heading of be careful what you might wish for. I fully support it. But the logical conclusion of what we're asking is that if local residents are paying developers for services that in the normal run of things their council would be providing to them, then the logical conclusion is that someone might say, well, Northamptonshire County Council, Northampton Borough Council, clearly you don't need as much tax income from those residents as you're currently receiving, because they're not paying you for service X or service Y, they're paying somebody else. So it could be that the conclusion of the process that we're initiating, which I fully support, might be that someone will come up with some devious means by which we get less, or our successor authorities get less council tax from local residents. Remains to be seen, but I'll support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Councillor Pindas-Jahan for putting this motion forward. This is a very valid motion, and it's a really motion that is good for people who lives in these areas where this management committee is happening. I'd just like to give you some examples I've got a particular area in my division which comes under this guise, and what happens is every year the residents from these new build properties get the bill for services, they call it management services, and it can vary from 40 to 60 to 70 pounds, which if you take, if you've got an estate like where I represent, 67 houses, it's quite a bit of money. And what do these people get for their services? Well, I'm going to tell you what they get for their services. Twice a year, they have a small area of grass, no bigger than this room. And what they do is they send a company down from Lincolnshire twice a year to cut the grass, and that is it. That's exactly what the residents have to pay. And I've been representing residents over this, and they're quite upset that this happens because it creates quite a bit of a burden. When you've got a mortgage to pay, when you're buying a new house, the mortgage is quite high, and on top of this you get this bill. I think they get
1 minute left.
Yeah, they get this bill, and it causes lots and lots of problems. We did pass this over on the Borough Council, a similar motion. It was a similar motion that we passed, and it like this chamber, it received full cooperation, and that was really quite good. So I thank her for accepting our amendment, and this goes through. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for the benefit of all council, I'd like to report that in 1617, the previous administration set up a working party to consider unadopted roads in this county. It was slow starting off. It was cross-party. Councillor Scrimshaw and myself and two others who didn't seek election in May 2017 were part of it. We got somewhere. It was very, very difficult, as Councillor Ty mentioned before, to secure the information we wanted from both specialists in the county council and also from developers and other local authorities. Running up to election time in May 2017, it was concluded that there was inadequate time to get the report finished, so that it was shelved. It was reintroduced in 2018 with new administration, and myself and 3 or 4 others joined the working party. It made reasonable progress through the good efforts of a colleague of ours in Democratic Services, and it came to a wee bit of a shuddering halt, I suppose, when the Overview and Scrutiny Committee took place, because it was clear that working parties were going to be restricted at that point. And as a result of that, we asked the Democratic Service whether it was possible to do a truncated version, a critique, if you like, of what was reported so far. It wasn't complete. It certainly didn't include too many of the developers, just 2, which Councillor Ty mentioned. But it did. We were intending to deal with reports from planning authorities, in other words, the 7 planning authorities around the county. It didn't happen. It's still work in progress if it's the desire of this council to continue with it, but we haven't got a report yet.
Thank you. Councillor Eakins.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Chown's motion is very good, but I think it may be the tip of an iceberg in making other revelations. As we know, and it's already been adhered to, that there are certain roads on developments within our county that haven't been adopted for many years, and in some cases the developers are no longer in existence, leaving unadopted roads for other people to pick the bill upon. Maybe it's worth probably, when we do start lobbying the MPs for support on this, maybe it's worth pushing that bonds be put up by the developers in the first instance, to make sure that on completion of building the houses, of course, because that's their main income and that's where they get their money from, and as soon as they've got their money, they subsequently, some cases go bankrupt, shall we say. Therefore, then they can no longer finish off the development, which means that on the areas where they are not going to make any profit, but spend profit on. So maybe it would be worth doing that in the first instance, and at planning, when planning has been discussed at all the Ds and Bs, all the 2 unitaries, if we go that way. Part of the consideration will be to make sure that there is enough money in the development to complete the roads and the public spaces, and therefore is at the whether the company goes bust or not, or whether it's still there, they have the moral duty to finish off the job that they started. After all, they will be making excessive profits in some of the developments. So maybe, Chairman, that should be something else that's added to the lobbying of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor González de Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This matter has been raised now since I've been here for the last 30 years. It has been raised many times, as we know, on a regular basis. And there clearly is an imbalance in terms of the expectation of those who buy homes on areas that are due to be finished. In fact, there are 3 or so sites that I'm aware of that have never been completed. And in fact, one site that was due for adoption, where Anglian Water refused to adopt the drains, and therefore it became a private estate, which introduced a management company. Clearly, the purchasers of those homes were unaware of that and had never planned on having to pay additional fees for, or in perpetuity in reality. So we have a situation clearly with unbalance in terms of what's available. Clearly, the public purse cannot take much more pressure as it is currently, but we do need that very important word here, regulation of those management companies. I think that that's the most important thing, because quite clearly it identifies the fact that there will be then fairness and appropriate charges levied, as opposed to those wildly out of reality charges that good Councillor Hughes identified earlier on. So I stand to support the motion, and I think that we should do all possible to make it very clear that yes, road making bonds do exist and are already utilised, but that we do absolutely need to have those roads finished within a certain timescale. Otherwise, they will be completed and we will use those bonds, rather than them sitting there for many years and never being completed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think that's all the speakers now. Right, first of all, I'm going to ask if the Council accepts the alterations. All right, okay. And secondly, we go, do you accept the motion? Sorry? Oh, sorry, the proposer does have the right of reply beforehand.
I'll keep it very brief. I'd just like to thank everyone for their support across the chamber for this motion. Clearly there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think as councillors we all need to work together to ensure that our residents are getting the best value. And again, this is a national issue, so we do need to lobby our MPs and make all the relevant, to make the relevant changes, with the authority that they have there as well. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your support and input.
Thank you. Now does the Council accept that motion? Nobody against? No. Good. Thank you. I think that's the end, isn't it? With a bit of luck. There is no urgent business. That is the end. Thank you.